We are going to get started now. I would again ask everyone who is on the call who is not on mute to please go on mute so that we can get a good recording and communicate all of the information we know is so important here today. I want to welcome you. My name is Pam Marsh. I'm the House Representative for District 5 in Southern Jackson County, which includes the communities hard hit of Talent and Phoenix and the outskirts of Ashland. And among our many manufactured home residents who have been displaced, and for some who have had their houses survive, there are many questions that have emerged. And today is a chance to try to answer some of those questions. We have with us representatives from the Oregon Law Center and from the Department of Insurance. Today's format will be this. I have a list of questions that I worked on with advocates. We think that these address many of the larger issues that are confronting our manufactured home residents. We will go through these questions and then we will, as time allows, take questions from members of the audience. If you have those questions, please type them in the chat. And now I need to pause because we are also doing Spanish language translation, and I've realized I've gone probably much beyond where I should have paused. So, Carla.
Sí, este es un video que vamos a platicar sobre información de los incendios forestales. Estamos con la representante Pam Marsh y estamos también con representantes abogados del Oregon Law Center, igual el Departamento de Seguros de Oregon. So vamos a hacer preguntas. Si usted tiene una pregunta, por favor póngalo en la cajita de charlar y nosotros trataremos de responder. Si por favor no está hablando hoy, por favor ponga su apague el sonido para que no se escuche y vamos a tratar de lo mejor para responder a todas las preguntas.
Gracias. With that, we will start with an introduction of all of the panelists and the experts we have to draw upon today. First, I want to introduce Tricia Goldsmith. She is the manager of the Consumer Advocacy and Outreach section of the Division of Insurance. This section is staffed with advocates that act as the division's front line in consumer protection.
Vamos a empezar con las introducciones. Primeramente queremos introducir a la señorita Tricia Goldsmith. Ella es la encargada de la unidad que es para el Departamento de Seguros, la unidad de representantes del consumidor y la coordinación de información y educación para los consumidores de Oregon.
Gracias. And Carla, our speaker, Carla Martinez is an outreach coordinator and acts as the boots on the ground. Carla has been to many sites throughout the state that are suffering from the recent fires.
Y mi nombre es Carla Martínez, yo soy una de las coordinadoras para el Departamento de Seguros. Y mi posición me da la oportunidad de visitar diferentes áreas que han sido afectadas por los incendios forestales. Y hoy voy a ser la intérprete de hoy.
Brian Fordham is the P&C program manager. The P&C section is responsible for the approval of insurance forms and products, as well as insurer compliance with the Oregon Insurance Code.
Y el señor Brian Fordham es el encargado, el manejador de la unidad que también trabaja para la agencia de seguros, y en la unidad de él aprueban las formas que las compañías someten para revisar y aprobar las formas y los precios de seguro.
John Van Landingham is a longtime lawyer for the Lane County Legal Aid and Advocacy Center and is active with the Oregon Housing Alliance, the Fair Housing Council, and the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing.
Y tenemos el abogado de John Van Landingham, y él trabaja con el Oregon Law Center. Y, can you repeat that last?
Oregon Housing Alliance.
Y también es parte del Oregon Housing Alliance.
The Fair Housing Council of Oregon.
El Fair Council Housing of Oregon.
and the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing.
Y es también parte del Network de Affordable Housing.
And Representative, can I supplement that?
Yes, sí.
Because Lane County Legal Aid merged with the Oregon Law Center. So that's where I work now. And I think it's important for people to know that I represent park tenants and am a board member of the Oregon State Tenants Association, the statewide park tenants association.
So, el señor John también representa a los residentes de los parques de las casas prefabricadas y él trabaja porque ahora ya el Legal Aid de Lane County es parte del Oregon Law Center. So es muy importante que él se da a saber que él representa a los residentes de los parques.
Thank you, John, for that addendum. And finally, Bill Miner is an attorney in Portland who represents manufactured home park landlords around the state.
Y Bill es un abogado y él representa los dueños de los parques de las casas prefabricadas y él va a hablar hoy también.
He works collaboratively with John on statewide landlord-tenant coalition and other issues affecting manufactured home park tenants.
Y él trabaja muy directamente con John, haciendo diferentes tipos de, o respondiendo a diferentes tipos de asuntos sobre leyes de los dueños del parque y también los residentes que viven en el parque.
Gracias. All right, now we will start with the questions that we have arranged.
One other thing that I know I want to say on Bill's behalf before somebody assumes otherwise, he does not represent any of the parks that burned.
Right.
Y para ser claro, Bill no representa a ninguno de los parques que fueron afectados por los incendios forestales.
Thank you. So we are going to start now with the questions that we have determined ahead of time. I will state the question in English and then we'll have a translation and then we'll do the same thing with the answers as they occur. So the first question is, why is my insurance check made out to both myself and the manufactured home park?
Ok, la primera pregunta es, ¿por qué mi cheque está escrito al nombre mío y el nombre del parque?
And Tricia, we're going to call on you for an answer.
Perfect. Thank you, Representative Marsh. The insurance check is going to be written out. If that policy you have is a legal contract, so it's going to be written out in the name of the insured or an additional insured or any mortgage company that you have listed on your policy. Depending on what coverage they're writing that check for. So most commonly, if it's coverage related to the dwelling or the dwelling extension, they would write that check out to the name of the insured. And if there's a mortgage company, because they would have an interest in the property. So it's going to be, again, that check will be written out based on how it is listed on that insurance contract. And if it includes the manufactured park, it will often be either because they are listed as an additional insured, or it's possible that they might have been acting some in the capacity of a mortgage.
Okay. Voy a simplificar la respuesta. Básicamente, si usted tiene una póliza con su compañía de seguro y la póliza estaba escrita al nombre del residente y el parque a donde usted vivió requiere que usted ponga el parque como un asegurado o quizás en ciertos casos que estén en la póliza como personas interesadas en la póliza, entonces el cheque va a estar escrito como está la póliza escrita. So, si usted está como asegurado en la póliza y también el parque está como asegurado o asegurado adicional, entonces el cheque va a estar escrito a como está la póliza escrita. También si usted tiene una hipoteca o préstamo en un banco y el banco exige que ponga el nombre del banco en la póliza, entonces el cheque va a estar escrito al nombre del residente o del dueño de la póliza, al dueño del parque, si es que se requiere, o si usted tiene el contacto con el parque de esa manera, y al nombre de la hipoteca.
Gracias.
Can I supplement that?
Yes, John.
So just as a general comment, and I'm going to break this up for the translator, Oregon has a practice of addressing almost all landlord-tenant issues, residential landlord-tenant issues by statute. That's unusual for a state. Unfortunately, we did not anticipate a situation like the disastrous fires in the Almeda area. There's no statute that addresses what happens when a manufactured home park burns from a wildfire. We don't have a statute that controls whether a landlord can require homeowners insurance. Maybe I should stop there and do the translation.
Yeah. Thank you. So el señor John estaba explicando que en el área de Alameda no hay una ley que requiere que el dueño del parque requiera seguro. Entonces, en este caso, sería como, por ejemplo, en el contrato de la renta. Right, John, I'm explaining it as there's no contract in the Alameda area that requires the landlord to have the resident have homeowners insurance. Is that correct?
There's no statute that regulates this issue.
Yeah, que no hay una ley que regula o que tiene autoridad a requerir ese tipo de requisito.
Without a statute, it's generally left to the contract between the parties. Oregon law does require manufactured home park landlords and tenants to have a written contract.
So,
some of those, go ahead.
El Oregon Law Center requiere que el dueño del parque tenga un contrato con el residente del parque, pero no hay una ley que dice que el dueño del parque tiene que requerir seguro de vivienda.
There is a statute that regulates whether an apartment landlord can require homeowners insurance.
So, sí hay una ley que dice que dueños de apartamentos tienen que requerir los residentes que viven en los apartamentos tengan seguro de vivienda o de renteros de inquilinos.
There are lots of good reasons for a landlord to want to require a tenant to have homeowners insurance to protect both the homeowner and the home, but also to protect other homeowners in the park and the landlord's property.
Es exigido o es buena idea que el dueño del parque requiera que los residentes tengan seguro para proteger la persona que vive ahí y también a los vecinos o otras personas que viven en el parque. Pero como les vuelvo a repetir, no hay una ley que exige que
there's a good reason why they'd want to be listed on the insurance policy, because otherwise they won't know if the tenant fails to renew the policy. Usually insurance policies require annual payments, and without that notice, you could have insurance at the beginning, but not have it after that.
Y es buena idea que se exige que los dueños del parque se pongan en la póliza como personas interesadas para que se aseguren que los residentes sigan pagando sus pólizas de seguro, porque es muy posible que usted pague el premio del año y no renueva su póliza, y si no renueva su póliza, el dueño del parque no se va a dar cuenta.
So but being listed as an additional insured is not the only way to do that. With apartment tenancies, that statute limits the landlord to being listed as an interested party. so that the landlord gets notice of non-payment but does not get the proceeds.
So, hay dos diferentes, o hay más de una manera de poner el dueño del parque en la póliza. En el ejemplo de los apartamentos, el dueño de los apartamentos se puede poner como una persona interesada. No necesariamente se pone como una persona asegurada, porque el dueño del apartamento quizás no tenga los mismos derechos de tener acceso a los beneficios de la póliza, pero en el caso de verificar si la póliza está vigente, se puede poner como persona persona interesada, no asegurada. Es la diferencia.
Representative Marsh and Senator Jeff Golden and I and other advocates and landlord advocates will be looking at possible new legislation in the 2021 legislative session to address issues like this.
Las oficinas con las que trabaja John y también la representante Pam Marsh están trabajando para dirigir leyes que van a hablar sobre este tipo de asunto que quizás esta vez no nos preparamos porque no nos preparamos por lo que había pasado. Estamos trabajando están trabajando para nuevas leyes para que se protegen o tengan más protección o estén más preparados para un asunto de esta manera.
I'm done.
Okay. It was a long answer to the first question, but I think we covered many pieces of that. So the second question, how can I figure out what is included in my payment from the insurance company? Carla?
So, la segunda pregunta es, ¿cómo puedo averiguar que el pago de mi seguro incluya, o qué es lo que incluye el pago de mi seguro? Cuando su aseguranza le hace un cheque, ¿cómo puede averiguar qué es lo que está incluido?
And Tricia, can you answer that?
Yes. So the insurance company should give you a breakdown of what that insurance payment or the check is for. Again, there might be, based on the situation, multiple checks issued for the same loss. When there's a large loss like this, a lot of insurance companies are stepping in and will, depending on the amount of the loss, they can write an initial check for a percentage of contents amount for the dwelling, possible additional living expenses, possible cleanup. And so if there could possibly be multiple checks issued based on, if it's for the dwelling and there is a mortgage, it could be listed to the insured and the mortgage company. Whereas if they write a check for the contents, it might just be for the insured. So any check written, the insurance company should be able to give you a breakdown of what policy benefits those monies are for.
So, lo que pasa es que cuando la aseguradora le manda a usted un cheque, debe de ver como una cuenta o un estado de cuenta que va aplicado con el pago que le están mandando. So, por ejemplo, si le están mandando un pago para cubrir lo que es la vivienda, ahí va a decir exactamente en el cheque o en un talón de cheque para qué es esa cantidad que le están mandando. Originalmente, o sea, si le están mandando un cheque que es parte de la vivienda y tiene usted su banco listo en la póliza, el cheque va a ser al nombre de los dos, de usted y del banco. Pero quizás si le están mandando un cheque por los beneficios de su propiedad personal, como sus cosas, y el cheque va a decir ahí, ok, X cantidad va a ser para sus propiedad personal como sus cosas, entonces quizás ese cheque nada más va a estar escrito al nombre de usted, porque eso no tiene que ver con el banco. O a veces las compañías de seguro le mandan un cheque inicial para cubrir costos iniciales de, por ejemplo, de si tiene que ver con hotel o de comida o X cosa, la compañía de seguro le puede dar un porcentaje de lo que usted tiene de su seguro, su plan, y se lo van a dar escrito al nombre de usted. So, quizás ese cheque no le van a incluir a las otras personas aseguradas en su póliza, como el banco, o quizás en el nombre del dueño del parque.
Phew. Okay, here's a relatively easy question. How can I get a copy of my insurance policy? Carla?
Y la otra pregunta es, ¿cómo puedo obtener copia de mi póliza, de mi seguro?
And Tricia, that's for you too.
Yeah, so many companies, it can be as simple as just going online, and you can have access to your policy online. If you prefer not to work online or want a hard copy, all you have to do is request that from your company and they will mail you a paper copy of your policy. It might be helpful too if you do have an agent. If you're looking, the policies can be fairly long, and so if you're looking for a specific answer to a question or a specific area, you could always ask your agent for guidance too of what section you should be looking for in your policy for an answer. But it should be very simple to get a copy of your policy online or to request a paper copy.
Hay diferentes maneras que usted puede pedir una copia de su póliza. Usted puede pedir una copia de su póliza si usted visita el sitio web de la compañía donde compró la póliza, o también puede llamar al número de teléfono del servicio al cliente y pedir una copia que se la manden por correo. Otra opción sería, si usted tiene el nombre de su agente, usted puede llamar a su agente a pedir una copia y también su agente le puede ayudar a recibir esa copia de póliza.
Así es. The next question. If I get a check for cleanup, do I have to give it to the manufactured home park?
Si recibo un cheque para la limpieza, o sea, para que tiren toda la basura que quedó, ¿lo tengo que dar al dueño del parque?
And that question is for Brian. See, Brian, are you here? There you are. Brian, we're not hearing you.
I can maybe take over that answer for Brian while he works on.
Oh, connecting to audio. It says connecting to audio. Are you?
I was just kidding.
Let's see. If everyone who is listening could put their phones on mute, that would be super.
Por favor, apague el sonido en su computadora para que las personas presentando puedan hablar. Gracias.
Okay, Brian is not getting connected. So Brian, you may want to leave and come back in. But in the meantime, we will call on Tricia for that question. And again, the question is, if I get a check for cleanup, do I have to give it to the park?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question from the insurance perspective of it. So the check, if the check is written out to you only as the insured, there's not any obligation based on the insurance policy that you give that payment to any other party. So there might be other contracts at play that you would need to take into consideration, but as to a check being written out from your insurance company, if it's written to you as the policy holder, there would not be any obligation under the insurance contract to give that monies to another party.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, let me answer this little piece and then we can move on. So si la aseguradora o la compañía de seguro le manda un cheque escrito al nombre solamente de usted como el dueño de la póliza, no hay ningún obligación a que usted dé ese cheque al parque. La aseguradora no le va a decir a usted si tiene que dar el cheque o no tiene que dar el cheque. Ahora, hay otros contratos quizás que usted tuvo con el dueño del parque que le exige que pase ese dinero a ellos, pero por el lado de la aseguradora, no, la aseguradora, su compañía de seguro no le va a exigir que dé ese cheque al dueño del parque.
So
John, do you want, yeah.
yes, I wanted to interrupt because I think that a lot of the questions that people have that are evidenced in your list touch on this particular issue. And a bunch of questions in the chat do the same. So let's try to break it up and make it clear because I get confused about it myself. Let's say the insurance check is just to the tenant, okay? And let's say that the landlord is saying to the tenant, I'm not giving you back your security deposit or your prepaid rent. In other words, the rent from the day of the fire to the end of September, you've paid September rent. I'm not going to give that back to you unless you sign over your insurance proceeds for cleaning up the space.
So, por ejemplo, si el dueño del parque dice, no te vamos a dar tu depósito y tampoco no te vamos a reembolsar lo que usted ya ha pagado de renta hasta que usted traslade el cheque o la cantidad de cheque que le mandó su compañía de seguro al dueño del parque.
So I would invite Bill Miner to disagree with me if he does. So we have both perspectives of a tenant lawyer and a landlord lawyer. But it is not the cleanup check is not the same thing as the landlord's duty to return the deposit and the prepaid rent. They're not the same thing.
Okay.
One should not be a condition.
Let me explain that. So, si el dueño del parque le requiere que le pase el cheque, no es lo mismo el cheque que le están cobrando o la cantidad que le están cobrando para limpiar a lo que usted pagó de depósito y lo que tienen de su renta. Son dos cosas diferentes. So just to make sure, John, the rent and the deposit is separate and is two different things from the check that the insurance company provides for the... So son dos cosas diferentes. No pueden mezclar las dos.
On the other, however, a landlord can deduct from the deposit any money the tenant owes the landlord.
So, el dueño del parque puede quitar o reducir la cantidad de su depósito si la persona, el residente que vive en el parque debe una cantidad al dueño del parque.
So if the law considers the tenant responsible for the cleanup, but the landlord does the cleanup, then the landlord may claim that the tenant owes money for the cleanup and could deduct that or demand to deduct that from the deposit.
So, si el dueño, you know what, I think you're going to have to repeat that again. I'm sorry. I think it's too long, so maybe just break it into two parts.
So if the landlord does the cleanup of the debris.
So, si el dueño del parque limpia su área, okay, go ahead.
And the tenant is legally, and if the tenant is legally responsible for the cleanup.
Y si legalmente el residente o el dueño de la casa es responsable para la limpieza,
then the landlord could deduct that cost from the deposit.
entonces en ese caso el dueño del parque le puede reducir la cantidad del depósito.
But there were several ifs in what I just said.
Pero hay muchas quizáses o preguntas en lo que acabamos de explicar.
And the first question there is, who is doing the cleanup? I understand that FEMA and or the state are paying for the cleanup.
So la primera pregunta es, ¿quién hace la limpieza? Ahorita FEMA se está encargando de hacer la mayoría de la limpieza, igual que el estado de Oregon también se está encargando de limpiar.
So, and probably Representative Marsh knows that subject better than I do. But let me also note that if the insurance check is made out to both the landlord and the tenant, both of you are going to have to sign it.
So, si el cheque está escrito al nombre del dueño de casa, igual que incluye el nombre del dueño del parque, las dos personas van a tener que firmar ese cheque.
I think that's what I wanted to say. Bill, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree. I think that if the check is made to the tenant, that is the tenant's money. Period.
So, Bill dice que si el cheque está al nombre escrito al dueño de la casa, que es la persona asegurada en la póliza, el cheque es de la persona, el dueño de casa o la persona que está asegurada en esa póliza.
Now, there's a whole nother big question here, and that is whether a particular statute on abandoned property is implicated. And I don't know that it would be helpful for Bill and I to go through some nerdy landlord-tenant junkie discussion of that statute. But I will say something after you translate.
Okay, so hay leyes. Actually, John, can you repeat that last part again?
This issue is complicated further by a question about whether a particular statute applies. And that statute covers abandoned property.
So, hay preguntas sobre la ley que habla sobre propiedad abandonada. So, también hay diferentes asuntos que pueden suceder sobre esa causa que es la propiedad abandonada.
That statute covers what happens when a park tenant, a resident, leaves and abandons or leaves the manufactured home in the park.
So, esta ley habla sobre si el residente del parque o la persona que vive en el parque no regresa o se va por completo.
And what it does is say that the landlord has to give the tenant a written notice, and the tenant has to either remove the manufactured home or allow the landlord to dispose of it and charge the tenant for the cost of disposal.
So, eso, hay muchos asuntos, pero la ley dice que, por ejemplo, si, o también tiene que estar escrito en el contrato que si la persona se va por completo o no está ya en el parque, puede que él siga siendo responsable por la limpieza o lo que dejó.
But we never anticipated that this would apply in a situation where the home is now nothing but ashes and twisted metal. So the legal, I'll leave you to that.
So, can you repeat that again? Sorry.
We never anticipated that the quote abandoned manufactured home would be a pile of ashes and twisted metal.
So, no nos preparamos por la situación que pasó con los incendios que dejó la casa en puro ceniza y no en la casa.
So it's my opinion, and that's worth nothing. It's my opinion that there is nothing that has been abandoned or that is abandoned but a pile of ashes, and that's not abandoned property. But someone might view that differently.
So, no, por ejemplo, es difícil determinar si las cenizas que dejaron, o sea, que se quemó, es parte de. So I'm sorry, you said the ashes, if the ashes were part of the.
I don't believe that removing ashes is what was intended to covered by that statute.
So, no, nosotros, él dice que la ley no habla sobre las cenizas o si fue intentado cubrir lo de la ceniza. So, la ley no estaba escrita de esa manera.
And
Okay.
Representative Marsh, if I may, I'm not disagreeing with John, although I was hoping to hear the Spanish word for nerdy, but I didn't get that. But I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him. I do think that there could be a landlord that argues that the idea is that the home, whether it's intact or in ashes, is still personal property on the premises, and that the landlord is still entitled to some type of a storage charge for that. So I think that there could be a landlord that does argue that, but I'm not necessarily disagreeing with John.
So,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I keep forgetting.
So Bill dice que es posible que uno de los dueños del parque puede pelear el caso de que las cenizas fue en algún tiempo parte de la propiedad abandonada por el residente. Entonces, porque la ley no habla específicamente, Bill está diciendo que puede haber un dueño del parque que va a pelear ese caso de esa manera. O puede pelear el caso de esa manera.
So somebody has asked in the chat whether, whether it makes any difference that the tenancy terminated. It's my view that the tenancy terminated on September 8th with the fire. There's nothing left of the tenancy. There's nothing left to rent. Go ahead with that.
So hay una pregunta en el chat que dice ¿qué fecha se cumplió el contrato, o sea, determinar que la persona ya no se considera un residente del parque? Y eso fue septiembre 8. September 8th, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Septiembre 8, desde septiembre 8 en adelante, ese contrato ya no existe porque desde septiembre 8 se declaró como ya ese contrato no válido del residente al dueño del parque.
But that statute also says that the landlord is not required to return a deposit or prepaid rent until after the abandoned property process is completed, unless certain things happen. And one of those is that the tenant waives any right to the abandoned property. In this case, that would be the pile of ashes. Go ahead with that. Can you want me to repeat that?
Yeah, I think the first part and then break it into two sections.
The statute that applies to abandoned property says that the landlord is not required to return the deposit or prepaid rent until 31 days after certain events, one of which has to do with the abandoned property.
Okay. So, después de 30 días que la propiedad ya no esté, o supuestamente esté abandonada, no tienen que regresar el depósito o, is it also prepaid rent? The
Yes.
deposit and prepaid rent? So, el depósito y la renta prepagada.
There is a way around that, and that is a written waiver by you, by the tenant, of your right to the abandoned property.
So, hay una manera que usted puede trabajar en eso o pedir como una apelación, se puede decir, para pedir que usted abandonó o ya no, is it abandoned, we want to use the word abandonment of the property, abandonar la propiedad para que le puedan regresar ese dinero.
So you should, if a landlord asks you to sign a waiver of your rights under that statute, which is 90.675, do it.
So, si el dueño del parque le exige que firme una carta que dice que usted, I'm sorry, you said to sign the waiver for
your rights under 90.675.
Que puede firmar una carta sobre la ley 90.90. What was the rest?
675.
675. Pueda, o sea, fírmelo. Si el dueño del parque le dice que firme bajo ese número de ley, fírmelo. So I'm saying that if the landlord asks them to sign a letter with that statute number for them to go ahead, it's okay for them to go ahead and sign it.
If they're waiving their rights under that statute, yes.
Si es que están, por decir, dirigiendo que ya no, que va usted o soltar su derecho de esa propiedad.
Don't sign any other waiver.
No firme ninguno otro papel o carta. Tiene que ser simplemente bajo ese número que es 90.675. 90.675.
Correct. And if your landlord doesn't do that, you could do it on your own. You could do that by yourself by sending a letter to the landlord saying, I waive my rights under that statute.
O usted puede hacer una carta y incluir ese número de ley que dice que usted está pidiendo que usted ya no quiere tener derecho bajo esa ley.
Ready? Lots of
Yes.
information here. Thank you. Gracias. Can my rent refund be held back until the park receives my insurance information and or my agreement to sign waivers?
Well, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I apologize.
Can my rent refund be held back until the park receives my insurance payment or I sign waivers?
El dueño del parque puede detener mi cheque de depósito y de renta hasta que yo le firme el cheque de mi seguro.
And John, I think that's yours.
So we don't use the term rent rebate. What we mean here under the law is prepaid rent
Right.
for the period September 8th to September 30.
So, no usamos el término de rebate rent. El término es diferente. And John, what was the term you used? Not rebate, but the
Prepaid rent.
prepaid rent. Okay. So, renta prepagado.
So one is not a condition of the other. So the answer is, go
Uno
ahead.
no es condición del otro.
But I talked about this a little bit earlier. If the tenant is responsible for anything in this whole mess, then the landlord could deduct that from the prepaid rent refund.
So, si la persona que vive en la casa, si el residente es responsable, es posible que el dueño del parque detenga lo que se considera renta prepagada.
The statute gives the landlord 31 days to refund the deposit or the prepaid rent.
La ley requiere que el dueño del parque regrese todo lo que se considera renta prepagada y el depósito dentro de 30, is it 30 days or 31 days?
31.
31 días.
But that 31 days that clock doesn't start until we resolve this issue of abandoned property.
So, el tiempo de los 31 días no empieza hasta que se solucione el problema de el abandonamiento de la propiedad.
I don't think the abandoned property statute applies, but it's not worth litigating, going to court. Just do it. Do what we said earlier.
So, John no piensa que la ley de abandonamiento aplica, pero no vale la pena ir a corte por eso. Simplemente haga lo que les explicó hace ratito sobre la carta.
So there are other questions that are popping up in the chat about homes that survived the fire and are not piles of ash and debris.
That's right. And those are just the questions we are, I think, ready to go to at this point. And so let me share those questions and you may be able to answer them together. The first one is, what are the consequences if I leave my home in the park until cleanup is completed? A second question is, what does Oregon law require to establish habitability?
Can we do one question at a time for
Sure.
This
Yes.
is question number 1.
It's question 9 on our list. What are the consequences if I leave my home in the park until cleanup is completed?
¿Cuáles son las consecuencias si dejo mi casa en el parque hasta que se completa la limpieza?
I'm going to try to break this up into shorter answers. 1, no Oregon statute contemplated this situation.
Ninguna ley explica esta situación.
2, I think you can terminate the tenancy. I'm sorry, my wife is trying to yell at me. I think as a tenant, you can, if your home is still standing, the first question to you is it safe to occupy the home?
La primera pregunta sería para usted como el dueño de casa, si es seguro o si está suficiente seguro a regresar a su hogar o la vivienda.
There may be concerns, safety concerns about the air and about your water.
Quizás hay mortificación o inseguridad sobre el aire, la calidad del aire y la calidad del agua.
And I don't know the answers to that. That would be individual to each park and each home.
Y yo no tiene la respuesta de eso. Va a ser un caso individual dependiendo del parque y dependiendo de la casa.
My understanding is that some landlords with standing homes are allowing their tenants to decide themselves whether to continue to occupy the homes.
Hay casos que los dueños del parque están haciendo esa determinación y decidiendo si es seguro que las personas puedan regresar a la vivienda.
If you do occupy the home, then yes, you do owe rent, although my view is that the landlord should reduce your rent by some amount to reflect the damage within the park.
So, si usted vive en la casa o ya regresó, es costumario, es normal que el dueño del parque le va a cobrar la renta. Ahora, es recomendable o sugerido que el dueño del parque le reduzca la cantidad que tenga que pagar porque la calidad del parque no es igual a como estaba antes.
There's no formula in statute that would determine how much that rent reduction should be.
No hay un formulario en la ley que dice qué cantidad le tienen que reducir.
But if you were to argue this before a judge, you would probably be talking about things like the lack of a community room, the loss of the trees, the loss of landscaping, the fact that your view out your window is now looks like a moonscape, things like that.
Y si usted tiene que presentar su caso a un juez, usted puede decir que la calidad del parque, como los árboles, el resto del mantenimiento del parque no es igual a como estaba antes.
If, however, you don't want to reoccupy your home, And you, in my view, you can, I think, reasonably argue that the tenancy is terminated by the destruction of most of the park, but you want to leave the home on the space. I'll stop and wait.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. If you do not want to occupy your home,
Si no
If you-
quiere vivir en su casa,
if you choose not to move back into your home, and there might be good reasons for that because there's such a shortage of housing.
y si decide no regresar a vivir en su casa, y puede ser que eso es razonable,
And if you want to leave your home on the space,
y si quiere dejar su casa en el espacio,
then it's my view that you do owe some space rent.
y es en la manera que lo ve John, usted sí va a deber renta. Si usted hace si usted decide en no regresar a la vivienda.
I think that a tenant can't have it both ways. Either the tenancy is terminated or it's not.
Dice John que no el residente, la persona que vive en la casa, no puede tomarlo de las dos maneras. O termina su contrato de residencia en el parque o sigue con el contrato de residente con el parque.
If it is terminated, then you have to either remove your home or release the landlord to deal with it, as we talked about earlier.
So, si usted decide en no seguir viviendo en ese espacio en su casa, tiene la opción de quitar la casa o darle los derechos al dueño del parque.
If you do not terminate and you want to keep the home on the space, then you do owe the landlord something because that's a space that is being used.
So, si usted decide en tener la casa en ese espacio, entonces usted va a tener que pagar por el uso del espacio.
It doesn't matter whether you're living in it or not.
No importa si usted vive en la casa o no vive en la casa. Si usted deja la casa ahí y está usando el espacio, el dueño del parque le puede cobrar la renta.
If you can show that the home is unsafe to live in, then that would further reduce the rent you ought to have to pay.
Ahora, si usted puede comprobar que no está seguro o que no puede vivir en la casa, eso le puede reducir la cantidad que tiene que pagar de renta.
If you want to leave your home there and sell it to somebody who wants to live in it or wants to move it and live in it elsewhere, there's a process established in that statute 90.675 and in 90.680 for that.
So, si usted quiere vender la casa o pasarse el contrato a otra persona, hay leyes que hablan de eso y la ley es el 90.675 y 90.678.
And either way, if the tenant's leaving the home on the space and retaining ownership of the home, the tenant's going to owe something for the rent of the space.
So, de cualquier manera, si deciden quedarse en el lugar o dejar el lugar ahí, la persona, el rentero, tiene que pagar o va a tener que pagar alguna renta.
So, thank you, Bill, for anyway. I think that's all I want to say on the first question.
Today we heard, this is a diversion, but today we heard a story of someone who is living in a unit that has no water because the wells have been destroyed on the property. Is that individual required to pay rent?
Hay una historia que una persona vive en la propiedad, pero no hay agua corriendo. La pregunta es que si esa persona está responsable por... Now, Representative Marsh, was that last part that you said, are they still required to pay rent?
Yes.
Okay, so si la persona está siguiendo viviendo ahí, aunque no haya agua corriendo, tiene que pagar renta? Esa es la pregunta.
The answer is yes. The habitability statute does not work like a building code. In other words, it's not all or nothing.
Y la respuesta es sí. La ley no explica si es nada más cierta parte o no. Solamente habla si usted está viviendo en esa propiedad o no está viviendo en esa propiedad.
So one of the things that is required by that statute is a connection to a supply of water.
I'm sorry, the phone was...
Yeah, could you repeat that, John, please?
One of the things that the habitability statute requires is that the landlord provide a connection to a supply of water.
La ley solamente habla que el dueño del parque tiene que, o se requiere que el dueño del parque tenga conexión a agua, pero no necesariamente que la agua esté corriendo.
So in this case that Representative Marsh described with the well, I guess I don't understand why the well couldn't be fixed, but it's not the landlord's fault, and the statute, the habitability statute, is aimed at or excludes. Let me start that over again so you can translate it better. The landlord's duty to provide a water source provides an exception if it's beyond the landlord's control.
Okay, so la ley solamente habla que el dueño del parque requiere que
So for example, if there were an earthquake and
terremoto
and nobody had any water,
y ninguna persona tuviera agua,
that would be one thing. But here, I don't know why the landlord couldn't fix that well to make it work.
Pero en este caso, el dueño del parque necesitaría arreglar de donde es la agua para que todas las personas tengan acceso.
But the answer to the question is still, yes, some rent would be owed, but it would be reduced by the lack of water.
Pero en este caso sí tendría que pagar renta, pero la cantidad sería una cantidad más baja porque no hay agua corriendo en este caso.
And in the legal world, we call that diminution of rental value.
En el término legal es un término que se usa como para, se dice que es como devaluación de el valor de la propiedad.
And there's no set formula for that. It varies from situation to situation. For example,
no hay una fórmula fija, es nada más caso por caso.
I'll stop. Misty is asking about the safety of the water. The statute doesn't get to that level. It assumes that the water would have to be safe, but it doesn't get to the level of how you test or who does the testing, how frequently the testing is done.
La ley no habla de, por ejemplo, la pregunta era que, ¿qué tal si el agua no está bien, verdad? No está segura. La ley no habla de eso, solamente no habla, por ejemplo, que tienen que examinar el agua ni nada de eso. La ley no habla específicamente a la calidad del agua.
If the tenant can show that the water is not safe, then there would be diminution.
Si la persona puede determinar, o la persona que vive en la casa puede determinar que la agua no está segura para usar, entonces usted puede reclamar devaluación de la propiedad porque no, la calidad del agua no es buena.
I think I'm done.
John, do you want to say anything more about what the statute requires on habitability, or do you think we've covered that?
So in terms of habitability here, I think the issues are really water and connections to electricity. And I haven't heard any complaints about the connections to electricity.
So, la determinación de, por ejemplo, si la casa está, es suficiente segura para habitabilidad, es nada más pregunta si la agua es buena calidad y electricidad, pero no ha oído casos que la electricidad es un problema.
So one of the questions in the chat, or several other questions, address the potability of water. So the questions are, is there a path for the tenant to prove that the water is unsafe? But then the second question would be, is the landlord then obligated to do anything about that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question one more time?
Two questions, really. How does a tenant demonstrate that water is unsafe? And if they do so, does the landlord have any responsibility for that?
La pregunta es, ¿cómo puede la persona que vive allí, el residente, puede comprobar que la calidad de agua no es buena? Y cómo se lo puede, o sea, so that was part one about how could the resident prove that the quality of water is not good. What was the other part?
Then if there's a demonstration of that, is the landlord obligated to do something?
Oh, y si el residente se lo comprueba al dueño del parque, si el dueño del parque está obligado por ley en hacer algo.
So the statute, which is 90.730, people have cited it in the chat, requires a landlord to provide a water supply, a connection to a water supply.
Okay, la ley, can you repeat the number again?
90.730.
90.630? 730. 90.730 dice la ley que el dueño del parque tiene que tener conexión para agua y electricidad.
That requirement is to provide safe, quote, safe drinking water.
Y ese requerimiento dice que tiene que cumplir bajo esa ley que la calidad de agua esté segura para tomar.
Quote, to the extent that the water supply system can be controlled by the landlord.
Hasta que al extento que el dueño del parque tenga control o pueda hacer algo para requerir ese tipo de calidad de agua para tomar.
So if the local water district, I have no idea who that is in Talent, if the local water district is providing unsafe water, then I would say that is not within the landlord's control.
Y por ejemplo, si el distrito local que está proveyendo el agua es problema con ellos, con el distrito y no necesariamente con el dueño del parque, entonces la ley no va a aplicar.
But I've tried to keep up with some of Misty's emails. And so I know that Misty is concerned about ash getting into the water within the park's water system.
Pero la otra pregunta que nosotros tenemos es, la otra pregunta que se está haciendo es que si las cenizas se meten al agua, si eso sería o perjudicaría la calidad de agua para tomar.
I have no ability to evaluate whether that's the case.
Y John dice que él no tiene la posibilidad de evaluar si ese caso es válido.
And I would say that a tenant would need to provide the tests and show through tests that the water provided by the system within the park system is not safe.
I'm sorry, John, can you repeat that first part again?
A tenant would need to do the testing of the water in the tenant's home to find out whether it's safe.
So, el residente que vive en la casa sería responsable por determinar y examinar el agua si es seguro para tomar o no es seguro para tomar. So, la responsabilidad de comprobar si la calidad de agua está buena se cae en la persona que vive en la residencia.
There is no current statutory requirement that a landlord test the water within the park.
No hay ninguna ley que requiere que el dueño del parque examine o evalúe la calidad del agua.
If a tenant could show through the tenant's own tests that the water that turns up in her home is unsafe, then I think that would create a negligence duty on the landlord to address it.
So, si el residente puede determinar o comprobar que el agua no está segura para tomar, entonces a lo mejor eso puede caer como negligencia al dueño del parque.
John, can I add
Yeah.
something?
You bet.
I think it would be important to have the testing at the point of connection to the home, not necessarily in the home itself.
So Bill's making a good point.
John, we're losing your head from the
Oh.
picture.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I'm
Now we
trying to
got you.
read it. So Bill made the point that the landlord's duty is to provide safe drinking water to the space.
So, Bill dice que la responsabilidad del dueño del parque cae en que tienen que examinar, o sea, tienen que ser responsables por proveer agua saludable al espacio.
And that would mean where the landlord's system connects to the tenant's system, the tenant is responsible for the pipes within the space.
So, el dueño del parque solamente sería responsable de las pipas del parque a la conexión a la residencia. Ya lo que es de ahí de la conexión para dentro de la residencia, a las pipas que están dentro de la casa, ya sería responsabilidad de la persona que vive en esa casa. Entonces, solamente la calidad de agua tendría que ser evaluada a donde se conecta el agua del espacio a la residencia.
There's no provision in landlord-tenant law requiring somebody else to pay for that testing.
Y no hay ningún requisito en la ley que dice que alguien más tiene que pagar por ese examen.
This is an issue that must be affecting a whole lot of people in Oregon, not just from the Almeda Fire, but from the Santiam Canyon Fire, the McKenzie River Fire, the Clackamas River Fire.
So, esto nada más no es específicamente a las lumbres locales, sino que lumbres por todo el estado de Oregon en diferentes condados. So, esto estaría afectando a muchas personas.
I would hope that either the state or the counties, the affected counties, could get together and figure out a way to test and ensure that the water is safe.
John dice que le gustaría que los representantes de los condados y del estado de Oregon se junten para ver una manera de poder examinar o evaluar la calidad del agua para asegurarse que está segura.
So with that, we've had more than an hour of nonstop wonderful information. And we didn't go through all of our questions quite in the order because we covered a lot of material otherwise.
No, ya nos pasamos de la hora y cubrimos mucho material, mucha información y desafortunadamente no alcanzamos a hacer todas las preguntas en el día de hoy, pero sí pudimos cubrir mucha información sobre las preguntas que hemos recibido.
So I think we will pause now and I will ask the major speakers on this to make any comments about things we haven't covered and to make sure in the case of the Department of Insurance that we know where people can go to get help.
Vamos a darle los últimos momentos a las personas, a los representantes de la agencia de la división que cubre autoridad sobre las compañías de seguro para dar las últimas palabras o dar consejos o información sobre qué recursos hay o cómo pueden usted obtener ayuda.
So Tricia, what have we not covered from the Department of Insurance, and where can people go to get more help?
Yes. So if somebody feels that there is an issue or they have a problem with their insurance company, they can file a complaint. They can do that online. Very easy. If you go to our website, which is DFR, standing for the Division of Financial Regulation, so dfr.oregon.gov, you can file a complaint on the website. Also, if you go to that website, as soon as you open it up, you're going to see a red wildfire resource button. A lot of our common asked questions are, there's topics and they will address them. So if you click on that red wildfire button, that will be helpful information there. And then an easy link on that same homepage under our Get Help that will direct you how to file a complaint. Also, sometimes if somebody just has a general question, they don't necessarily want to file a complaint, but just want to talk to somebody, we have advocates. You can call 888-877-4894. And again, that information will be right on our website. But from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, if you just want to call and run a scenario past a property and casualty advocate, just as a side note to let people know, these are people from industry, claims adjusters, underwriters. So it's just that they would be able to help kind of walk you through a claims process, ask questions. Let's
let Carla, can we let Carla catch up with all that?
Yeah, so básicamente nosotros como agencia de parte del Estado de Oregon tenemos recursos para las personas afectadas. Si usted visita nuestro sitio web, que es dfr.oregon.gov, ahí hay información en español. Si usted oprima el botón rojo a donde dice Wildfires, o si usted hace clic a donde dice lenguaje o language, usted puede elegir la información en español. Entonces ahí hay recursos, información en español si usted oprima el botón rojo. También si usted necesita o quizás no sabe usted qué pasos hacer o qué pasos tomar, si usted tiene problemas con su compañía de seguro o con su agente de seguro o con su ajustador, puede llamar al número 888-877-4894 y hablar con uno de nuestros representantes del consumidor para hacer una pregunta, o quizás usted necesita llenar una queja con nuestro departamento para ver cuál es el problema o qué es lo que está sucediendo en su reclamo. Pero nosotros tenemos personas que hablan español. También quiero comentar que el proceso de queja es confidencial y no tenga temor de venir con nuestra agencia. Nosotros no hablamos con ninguna agencia federal, o quizás usted esté mortificado que quizás no tenga los requisitos de ciudadanía o cualquier cosa. El trabajo de nosotros no es eso, y nosotros no reportamos. Es muy importante que usted sepa que nosotros tenemos personas que le puede ayudar sin costo y sin ningún compromiso, y confidencial.
Oh, gracias. Tricia, was there anything else? We cut you off there so we could get a translation. Were there any other final comments you wanted to make?
I think my little amount of Spanish, I think I might have, Carla, heard you say you advise that we have that same information in Spanish online, and also have advocates that can answer questions in Spanish also?
Yes, I did. I informed that we have persons or advocates for
Perfect.
Spanish.
That's what I thought I heard you say. Thank you. So that's, unless you have something additional to share, I think that's all I have.
Brian, did you have any important top? I think we got you.
I think I'm off mute now, but
Yes.
no, I'm good. I think that we've covered all the points that that we wanted to cover, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you for being here. And John Van Landingham, the dean of all of this work, what final comments do you have for our listeners who are struggling with all these really challenging problems?
Don't you think I've talked enough already? So two things. One, Representative Marsh's website, her legislative website, has a whole lot of information, written information, including links to handouts on my organization's website, both in English and Spanish, talking about some of these questions. So I'd urge you to look at them. Secondly, I'm going to talk to...
Can I say that in Spanish?
Yeah. Yes, sorry.
El sitio web de la representante Pam Marsh tiene mucha información y también recursos disponibles para las personas. Están escritos en español. So también puede visitar el sitio de la representante Pam Marsh para obtener más información o educación o recursos si usted fue víctima.
Secondly, my sense is that a lot of people still have questions about the landlord-tenant stuff. And I'm going to ask Rep. Marsh afterwards whether we should do another one of these just about landlord-tenant with me and Bill and Michael Stout.
So, hay mucha preocupación sobre las leyes y el contrato, el lenguaje del contrato sobre el residente y el dueño del parque. So, John a lo mejor va a exigir que la representante Marsh, igual con John, con Bill y con otras personas, hagan un Zoom, una clase de estas que habla específicamente al lenguaje de las leyes y los contratos del residente contra el dueño del parque.
Another way to approach this might be for me to have a private conversation with some of the people who are asking the most questions, such as Misty. I can't do that this week, but perhaps next week, Misty, you could email me and schedule a time to talk on the phone.
I think, Misty, I'm going to assume that you heard that message. So John, I'm going to take you up on another Zoom around rent questions. I think both of those things that you suggested are good ideas. If you are able to go in depth on the phone with some of the people who are most engaged in this, that will be good. But clearly we have questions that are puzzling many people here.
Yeah, and just to be careful, I can't represent any of them as a lawyer, just as Bill Miner can't represent anybody here either. But I can certainly try to answer questions.
So, muy importante, John hizo quería estar claro que él no puede representar a ninguna persona aquí como abogado, ni tampoco Bill puede representar a ninguno de los dueños de los parques como clientes, pero John está dispuesto a si tiene preguntas o cualquier cosa o quizás necesita saber más información sobre algo, él está dispuesto a dar información.
So with that, let me say first a tremendous thank you to all of our speakers, and particularly to Carla, who has done an unbelievable job making all of this information available. We are very grateful to you, Carla. So here's virtual hand claps to you for that.
Gracias a todos.
We will schedule two things. One is we will post this recording on the legislative website, and I'll also put it on my Facebook site for those of you who are on social media.
I especially want to thank Bill because he's the only one of us, well, that's not true. Representative Marsh and Bill are not getting paid to do this.
So we will post a recording to this session on the legislative website, and we will be in touch to schedule another Zoom session specifically focused on rent questions and all of the complications posed by the situation that we are in. And Carla, if you can share that, then I think we're just about ready to wrap it up.
So, la información va a estar en el sitio web de la representante Marsh, igual en Facebook, y vamos a hacer, o van a hacer otro Zoom, otro tipo de clase o de junta para hablar específicamente sobre la situación que hablamos hace ratito sobre el rentero y el dueño del parque.
And Carla, one last thing, could you point out the legislative website link in the chat in case people didn't see it?
Sí, el sitio web de a donde va a estar grabado esta clase, ese Zoom, es www.Oregon Legislature. Es OREGONLEGISLATURE.gov. Está también escrito en el chat, pero ese es el sitio web y ahí va a poder encontrar esta clase.
And with that, thank you all, and have a good evening. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Todos.
Thank you.